The Land Cruiser earns its name the hard way, mile by mile, mistake by mistake, all the way north. After years of imagining this moment, I expected triumph. Instead, standing in front of the rusted "Welcome to Deadhorse" Alaska sign, I felt strangely small. It was well past 9 p.m., yet the sun still hovered above the horizon, refusing to set. The air was warm and heavy with diesel fumes. Long shadows stretched across the gravel lot. 9 days earlier, I'd left Los Angeles. Now, 4,031 miles later, I stood at the northernmost point you can drive to in North America, Prudhoe Bay. As I took in the sticker-covered sign, each decal a quiet testament to someone else's journey. 2 battered camper vans rolled in behind me. Out stepped 2 couples, all in their late 60s. They laughed, posed, took selfies. One of the men approached and, in broken English, asked if I could take their photo. They'd left Argentina 9 months earlier, he explained, following the Pan-American Highway through South, Central, and North America. That's when it hit me. For them, this sign wasn't an ending, it was the halfway point. They planned to turn around and drive it all again. Standing there, I realized something humbling. In the world of long road trips, I was still a beginner. Why Prudhoe Bay? If you've never heard of Prudhoe Bay, you're not alone. It's not really a town so much as an industrial outpost, a maze of oil infrastructure, gravel roads, and mega hotels built to support workers in North America's largest oil field. Located 500 miles north of Fairbanks and accessible only via the remote and unforgiving Dalton Highway. Prudhoe Bay marks the northern end of the Pan-American Highway, a nearly 19,000-mile ribbon of road stretching almost uninterrupted to Ushuaia, Argentina. Unless you're here for oil, there's only one reason to come, to reach the end of the road and then turn back. Because, as with so many places I've chased over the years, Prudhoe Bay isn't about being there. It's about what it takes to get there, the long way north. The hardest part of any adventure, for me, is the beginning. I'd spent nearly a decade dreaming about this trip. Yet with departure looming, I was overwhelmed, scrambling to install gear, pack supplies, and quiet the anxiety that always arrives right before the first mile. I knew from experience that once the wheels started turning, the stress would fade. It did, eventually. After a brutal 13-hour drive, my first night ended deep in Utah's Wasatch Range, pulling into a dark, narrow campground just before midnight. Exhausted, fumbling with my rooftop tent, I collapsed into my sleeping bag, questioning my life choices. Morning answered those doubts. Sunlight poured through the trees, revealing towering peaks and crisp mountain air. The road called again. Days blurred together in a rhythm of asphalt, gravel, rain, and endless fuel stops. Idaho's open plains gave way to Montana's storm-darkened mountains. Golden light washed over rolling pasture land as I dictated notes to myself, laughing at how many times I'd used the word epic. And knowing this time, it fit. Crossing into Canada felt less like a border and more like a shift in scale. The Canadian Rockies rose out of the mist, glaciers glowing an impossible turquoise beneath low clouds. Rain followed me through Banff and Jasper, where wildfire scars from the previous summer stood as stark, reminders of how fragile these landscapes are. Nights were late. Campsites were scarce. Cold rain seeped through fabric and bone alike. Once I slept in my down jacket as temperatures dropped into the 30s, but then came moments that erased the discomfort. A grizzly cub splashing in a creek, its mother emerging from the trees, bison grazing lazily beside the highway, fog lifting just enough to reveal mountains that felt too big to belong to this world, the Alaska Highway and beyond. Dawson Creek marked the official start of the Alaska Highway, a milestone celebrated with Harley, riders who'd been making the pilgrimage for years. From there, the road grew lonelier, and fuel became an obsession. The Land Cruiser drank greedily, rarely stretching beyond 250 miles per tank. Gas stations were few, sometimes closed, and always expensive. Still, the truck pressed on, soaking up punishment with quiet confidence. By the time I reached Whitehorse, the Land Cruiser was overdue for service, and I was overdue for a shower. Clean, resupplied, and running fresh oil, I headed north again, trading smooth, pavement for permafrost, warped roads that bucked and heaved beneath the tires. Then came Alaska. 7 days after leaving Los Angeles, I crossed the border. Construction delays, pilot cars, and endless RV traffic stretched the final approach to Fairbanks into an exhausting crawl. I took a night off from the tent. The next morning, my wife arrived to join me for the final push. The Dalton Highway. The Dalton Highway doesn't ease you in. Pavement ends abruptly, replaced by gravel and mud, and semi-trucks thunder past like mobile artillery, flinging rocks without mercy. Within miles, the Land Cruiser's windshield bore fresh scars. But the farther north we drove, the more the landscape transformed. Trees shrank, mountains sharpened. The Brooks Range rose ahead like a wall. Adigan Pass twisted us upward through jagged peaks streaked with moss and snowmelt. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline paralleled us relentlessly, a steel serpent stretching to the horizon. Past the mountains, the land flattened into rolling tundra. Rivers cut through permafrost banks like serrated blades. A red fox darted across the road. Later, a lone caribou trotted ahead of us into Prudhoe Bay, as if escorting us to the finish. We arrived with 15 miles of range left. That night, under an endless Arctic sky, we stood once more at the Dead Horse sign. The road was finished, but the journey wasn't. The way back. The return trip retraced much of our path. But Alaska still had stories left to tell. Moose, bears, a lynx maybe. 20 bison. Detours into family history, including the long-abandoned coal town of Suntrana, where my grandparents once lived in isolation, so complete it's hard to imagine. The final gift was the Denali Highway. 135 miles of gravel cutting through massive, untouched wilderness. It remains one of the most stunning roads I've ever driven, and somehow still a secret. Home. 18 days after leaving, I rolled back into the Motor Trend office. The odometer showed 8,412 new miles. I'd stopped for fuel 47 times, burned 472 gallons, and spiderwebbed the windshield with rock strikes. I was exhausted, sore, emotionally wrung out from days that stretched 12 to 14 hours behind the wheel. And if you asked me to do it again tomorrow, I'd start packing immediately, somewhere south of the Arctic Circle. Long after Prudhoe Bay had faded into memory, the road began to feel different. The urgency was gone. There was no longer a single sign, a single coordinate, or a single photograph waiting at the end of the day. The pressure I hadn't realized I'd been carrying since Los Angeles slowly loosened its grip. We were no longer chasing a destination, we were simply moving. That shift changed everything. We drove more slowly. We stopped without checking the time. We pulled over for rivers with no names, mountains without pullouts, moments that would never appear on a map. The Land Cruiser hummed beneath us, dusty, scarred, and finally at ease in the environment it had been built for. It no longer felt like a vehicle I was testing or documenting. It felt like a companion that had earned its place in the story. On one quiet stretch of road, my wife broke the silence. So, was it worth it? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the stress before leaving. The long nights, the rain-soaked camps, the gravel strikes, the fuel anxiety, the exhaustion that sometimes made me question why anyone chooses to do this to themselves. And then I thought about the bears, the empty horizons, the light that never fully left the sky. The feeling of standing at the edge of the continent knowing there was nowhere left to drive, but still 1,000 reasons to keep going. Yeah, I finally said. It really was. What the road teaches you. Long trips don't change you all at once. They work slowly, quietly, like erosion. Mile by mile, expectations wear away. Comfort zones thin out. What's left is something simpler and more honest. You learn how little you actually need. You learn patience, not because you want to, but because the road demands it. You learn that control is mostly an illusion, especially when weather, wildlife, fuel availability, and construction zones all have their own plans for you. Most of all, you learn humility. That rusted sign in Dead Horse taught me that. So did the Argentinian travelers. So did every person who smiled at a gas pump, nodded from behind a windshield, or warned us about rough roads ahead. No matter how far you go, someone has gone farther. And that doesn't diminish your journey. It puts it into perspective. The Land Cruiser reconsidered. By the time we crossed back into the lower 48, I had stopped thinking in terms of specs and numbers. Yes, the Land Cruiser was thirsty. Yes, its windshield looked like it had survived a meteor shower. Yes, it spent more time at gas stations than I'd care to admit. But it never failed to start. Never complained. Never made me wonder if it would get us home. It carried us through deserts, mountains, tundra, rain, mud, permafrost, and gravel with the same quiet confidence. In a world increasingly obsessed with screens and sensors, there was something deeply reassuring about a machine that simply did its job day after day, no matter how remote the road became. The real finish line, the true end of the trip, didn't happen in Prudhoe Bay. It didn't happen at the Dead Horse sign, and it didn't happen when we rolled back into the office parking lot. It happened later. It happened the first morning I woke up at home and instinctively reached for a jacket, expecting cold air and endless daylight. It happened when silence felt strange again. It happened when I realized I was already missing the uncertainty. Because the road doesn't just take you somewhere, it gives you something to carry long after the miles are gone. And once you've driven far enough north, once you've seen what waits at the edge of the map, a small part of you never really comes back. It just waits for the next road, for the next horizon, for the moment when packing a bag feels inevitable again,